Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Belew, and today we're going to have another cattle chat, our Facebook Live event. And today I have with us Dr. Clay Burson and Dr. Christina Hayes, and I'm going to let them do a quick introduction of themselves. And Clay, I'm going to start with you.
Well, thanks. Awfully excited to be here today. My name is Clay Burson. I live in Lubbock, Texas. Been with Purina about 4 years. I cover the western half of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Really enjoy my time getting to travel around the Southwest, visit with ranchers, and support our cattle sales team.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Burson. Dr. Hayes, can you give a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Christina Hayes, and I live in central Minnesota. I have been with Purina for about 5 years. I'm part of our beef tech team. I spend a lot of time talking to our salespeople, working on what products we have available where, and talking to our dealers and cooperatives partners as well. So a little about me.
All right. Well, thank you both. We got a lot of cool information to share with you guys today, and I'm really excited to jump into that content. Some of the topics that we're going to talk about today are how does nutrition impact cattle health, reproduction, performance, quick introduction to fetal programming and how it impacts your cattle operation on a year-round basis. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can manage your herd to optimize that performance throughout the year. And to kick things off, Dr. Burson, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could spend a little bit of time with us today to talk about how nutrition specifically impacts cattle health, reproduction, and performance.
Well, sure thing. I'd be glad to. You know, in my mind, nutrition is one of the most critical factors that influences health, reproduction, and overall cattle performance. We're talking about our breeding stock specifically. I'm going to go ahead and talk about our cow herd and bull battery, and I'll turn things over to Dr. Hayes and let her follow up with some discussion on our calf crop. So to start out with, one of the things I think is critically important to understand is that cattle health is really a fundamental pillar of a successful operation. When we think about providing nutrients in the diet, these key nutrients can really facilitate the immune system's ability to not only prevent disease, but also to mount an effective response in the face of health challenges that we might have from time to time. So when we think about nutrition, a cow's protein and energy status can really impact a number of things that influence her immune system, specifically the functionality of the important immune cells of the body, supporting an antibody response, and even allow cattle to cope with stress effectively, certainly all critically important areas of interest. And also, we think about providing nutrients in the diet. Micronutrients can play an important role. So we know minerals and vitamins are important to provide to cattle because they actually serve as coenzymes and cofactors in a variety of different biological pathways that are so critical for the immune system. So not only does nutrition directly influence the immune system, but also can play a key role in other areas like even vaccine efficacy and antibiotic responsiveness if we do have to treat some sick cattle from time to time. So I can't overstate how important quality nutrition is when we talk about our overall health program. Now I want to shift a little bit and talk about how nutrition can impact reproductive performance of your herd. So if I had to summarize this section of my talk with one point, I tell you this: nutrition impacts cattle condition, and cattle condition drives reproductive performance. To me, that's such an important focal point. And this statement really means if we miss the mark in terms of nutrition, we can have a domino effect that eventually takes place. So in certain situations, perhaps if we get into a spot where our cows are a little bit too thin prior to the calving season, we can compromise a number of factors related to production. We might have more dystocia and difficulty around the time of calving. Some calf health issues can pop up from time to time. And when it comes time to preg check, we might see more open cows and even some shortbreds at the time of preg check. And in the end, these factors can ultimately compromise profitability. And I think it's also important to remember our bulls because from time to time, they can be on the back burner in terms of our thought process. But I do know that it's critically important that prior to turnout, we make sure that our bulls are range ready. And to me, what range ready means is that we have bulls in optimal body condition score so they're ready to go out and cover cows and last throughout the breeding season. In my mind, they need to be functional, well-built cattle that have a sound set of feet and legs, and their plan of nutrition can directly influence not only their physical development, but also a number of reproductive factors like libido and even semen quality. So it's critically important that we have them in good shape coming up to that time of the breeding season. In my mind, that bull's really an athlete. He's got to go out and work and cover cows throughout a long breeding season, oftentimes in adverse environmental conditions. So for this point, the bottom line is profitability depends on fertility. And to me, the best approach to maximizing reproductive performance is to implement a nutrition program that allows you to manage your cattle toward an optimal body condition score at key points of the production cycle. Now, we'll talk about this topic a little more later on in the presentation, but the key thing to focus on is making sure your cows never really have a bad day. And to me, what that means is throughout the year, we need to provide protein, energy, and mineral supplementation at the appropriate times to make sure that cattle meet their nutrient requirements in every season and stage of production. You know, one part of my job that I really enjoy is getting to travel throughout ranches in the Southwest. And every ranch I go to, they've got a different system in place, different types of cattle, different forage bases. And one of the coolest parts of my job is getting to help those folks integrate all those factors of production and design a nutrition program that fits their operation. Every program looks just a little bit different, but my focus is always in implementing a program that allows a strategic supplementation protocol to maximize the use of their forage resources. Now, that might be native pasture, hay, crop residues, or other forage resources, but in the end, maximizing those forages is my goal at the end of the day. And I'd be remiss if I failed to mention that mineral supplementation throughout the year always provides some benefits. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hayes to talk about the calf crop.
Yeah. So just a real quick, follow up, Clay, on that. What I really liked what you said in that is that line, never let your cattle have a bad day. It really does impact all of those things that you talked about, and that's a quote I use almost every time I'm out on a farm or ranch visiting with producers. And so really taking care of both the cow and the bull, they're both parts of the equation, right? So we really need to pay attention to that on both sides. Dr. Hayes, I know you got some information on calf nutrition. How can all this be impacted by how you treat that calf?
Yeah, I mean, Clay set the stage really well in terms of what we need to do with the cow and the bull. And really what I kind of wanted to get into is how it all starts for the calf. And in my opinion, how it all starts is with mom, right? And from conception, when we look at calf potential health, potential performance, maternal nutrition is going to heavily impact all of that during gestation. So when Clay talked about protein, energy, vitamin, mineral, a balanced program, that's all going to help nourish the developing fetus and support the growth and the birth of a healthy calf. When we look at how cow nutrition helps develop calf immunity, which is another aspect of this, for that calf developing their immune system, the one thing we have to remember is that's a lifelong process. So beginning at conception, that calf's going to develop innate immunity. And that's immunity that is born with, right? That's coming from nutrients it's getting from mom through the blood and the placenta. So they'll have an innate immune system that's growing in utero. And then there'll also be passive immunity, which is what the calf will receive largely from nutrition in the blood and colostrum and milk that it receives from mom. So maternal nutrition during gestation really impacts colostrum quality, what she's delivering via blood to that developing fetus. And all of that is critical to the first few weeks of life when that calf's born and its ability to fight disease and continue to be healthy. And one of the reasons colostrum is so important is because it does contain antibodies. It contains immunoglobulins that are going to recognize pathogen and help that calf fight against disease. And one of the challenges that calf has right out the gate is they can't produce the antibodies on their own. And that's why it's so important that they're able to get good colostrum from mom, that first milk, and be able to be, get off to a good start and fight some of those challenges that they may incur in that stressful time period. So one thing that we talk about a lot, I was thinking about this, is cow mineral nutrition. We talk about mineral nutrition up until calving, and part of that is because we've seen work done to show that a good source of available minerals, copper and zinc, those will help mom produce those antibodies, and those will directly impact colostrum quality for that calf and really help their immune system when they're born. so that they can get off to a good start. So when Clay talked about nutrition for mom and taking care of bull, and then we look at that calf developing in utero, I mean, from conception through gestation, through those first weeks of life, it all comes down to how we take care of the cow and how maternal nutrition impacts the developing fetus, and how mom's environment and what she goes through during gestation can impact not only her offspring, but generations after that. That's something that we call fetal programming, or maybe you've heard of it referenced as developmental programming. So I'd like to do is have Clay talk a little bit about what fetal programming is and that concept for us.
Yep, absolutely. You guys have both done a really good job to set up that conversation about fetal programming, taking care of mom on a year-round basis. And so, Clay, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you have lots of good information on what fetal programming is and some background content on that.
Yeah, it's a really exciting topic. And, fetal programming is really a rapidly evolving area of research as it relates to cattle production and other mammals for that matter. But really, the science of fetal origins originated from human epidemiological studies. So I'll kind of tell you a little bit of the basics and some of the neat things we found on the human side that really set the table for the research that's being done today in universities around the country related to fetal programming. So one of the most famous studies actually evaluated children that were born to women that were pregnant during what was called the Dutch hunger winter. Now, during World War II, there was a German blockade that prevented food supplies from reaching an area of the Western Netherlands. So as a result, the Dutch population in that area faced a period of severe calorie restriction throughout a really cold winter from November of 1944 on into the spring of the next year. So during this time period, there were women that were pregnant or became pregnant and faced starvation during various stages of gestation. Many years later, what we found is that children that were born to those women demonstrated some very specific health conditions that were actually related to the trimester of pregnancy that their mothers would have experienced during that Dutch hunger winter. For example, children that were born to mothers that were pregnant during the first trimester often experienced an increased incidence of cardiovascular disease as adults. Some children that were gestating or born to mothers gestating during the second trimester were more often prone to glucose intolerance later on in life. And kids that were born to mothers gestating during that third trimester were significantly more likely to develop asthma later on in life. Now, all of those health conditions can be related to some hallmarks of development in utero, and certainly we've come to understand more about that studying cattle and other species. So the findings of this and other epidemiological studies really gave way to the concept of what we call fetal programming or developmental programming today. And really, to summarize it in a simple statement, is the basic premise is that lifetime performance is influenced by events that take place long before birth. Now, we know this maternal environment is key, as Christina mentioned. How we take care of the cow during gestation influences the lifetime health and performance of her calf. And we also know that's true for other mammals as well, not just cattle. It's been proven throughout several species that both positive and negative outcomes can be created by how we take care of a gestating female in terms of nutrition. And really, this concept goes to what we call epigenetics, meaning that environmental factors influence the expression of genes. So although we're not changing the genetic code itself, we can change how that code is expressed. So basically, we're not changing the ingredients to the recipe, we're changing some of the factors on how that recipe is put together. It's a really complicated topic, and hopefully Christina can help us understand a little more of the detail of fetal programming.
All right. Thanks, Clay. Lots of good information. And, fetal programming, we're learning more and more about it every day and how it can impact cow productivity. And if we want to dive into specifically that information here, Christina, maybe give a little bit more background information about how each trimester is affected by fetal programming.
Sure. So let's talk about all the developmental milestones that are happening during gestation. So even though we've classically always talked about the third trimester, because we know that calf is going to grow the most in the third trimester, there's things going on in early to mid gestation that are a really big deal. In the first trimester, you're going to have limb development and all of your organ development, so your heart, liver, your kidneys, all of that is going to start developing pretty quickly in early gestation. We look at blood vessels forming and the placental attachment during early gestation. That placenta is going to be that home and that bed for that fetus to grow throughout its development in utero. So placental attachment, organ limb development, extremely critical in early gestation that calf is able to develop, that fetus develop properly. And then in the second trimester, while you still have continued organ growth, the other thing that's starting to happen is muscle tissue and adipocyte development. So we have this opportunity where muscle cells are going to commit. So you have satellite cells in your tissues, and they're going to commit to being muscle cells during that mid-gestational period. And for the most part, shortly after a calf is born, their myofiber number is for the most part established. There'll be some turnover with muscle breakdown and regeneration, but for the most part, muscle cell number and myofiber number is established. So it is during mid-gestation where we can really affect and impact the amount of muscle cells, the size of the muscle that will potentially grow later on in life, which is a big deal from a quality standpoint, from that animal's production later in life, right? So, one thing to always remember too with muscle development during mid-gestation is there's energy partitioning going on there. So that calf is going to take its nutrition from mom, and it's going to look and put that energy towards development of the limbs, development of the GI tract, the reproductive tissues, the ovary, the testes. That's going to happen around day 50, day 60 of gestation. Those things are all going to be prioritized right above muscle development. So important to think about all of these things going on in that mid-gestational period as well. And then in the third trimester, that calf is really going to grow in size, and we're going to see final development of the lungs. This is when the nutrition demands on mom are going to be the greatest, just because that calf is really taking off and that developing fetus is going through a growth spurt during that time period. So what we see, and we talk about all the events that happen during gestation and how that nutrition from mom via the blood and serum is being utilized by the developing fetus. What we see in the data and what we've been able to see as impact of fetal programming is when there is poor nutrition in early gestation, you can see offspring later on in life that have developmental challenges, whether it be the way their organs function, maybe it's brain health, maybe it's respiratory challenges, maybe it is challenges with energy utilization, fertility. We see challenges with the capacity to hold a successful pregnancy. So poor nutrition during early gestation can really have a negative impact on that calf once it's born later on in life. And then poor nutrition on the back half of gestation, the data we see there shows it hurting weaning weights and hurting gain, hurting carcass quality when we look at what we have the opportunity to do with muscle growth in mid to late gestation. So when we talk about today, body condition score and the ways that we can try to set that calf up for a good start, I think one of the most important things is to consider animal requirements. What's the nutrient content, the digestibility of the feed stuff you're offering, how much are they eating? Because our goal here during gestation is to provide, balanced energy, protein, vitamins, and minerals, so we can maintain body condition and be able to support the developing fetus. We think about our bred heifers, EB, they're going to have increased nutritional needs. They're going to be trying to support a fetus while at the same time they're trying to grow to 85% of their mature body weight, right? So they have another aspect and a further challenge on top of them, and looking to provide that balanced nutrition through changing forage conditions, that will help us get the calves off to a healthy start and be able to help mom in her next step, because we know that we'll be looking at breeding after that. So I've talked about what's gone on with the calf during gestation and leading up to calving, but we know we're trying to maintain a 365-day calving cycle. So in order to do that, we need to look at the other side of the coin, which is our breeding program. the two are linked and are very important to discuss in terms of what we can do there as well, and what we see with fetal programming. So Clay, maybe you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm speaking for Clay. I know you can, but when we think about some of the things that you talked about, Christina, from a fetal programming standpoint, often we get that question, which trimester is the most important, right? And if you think about all of the information that you just provided us with, in my mind, there's really no trimester that's more important than the other, right? We got to have them all working together so that the end result, whether that be, a calf that's going to, be fed out as a steer later on in life, or that heifer that's going to be maintained in the herd for a long time, it all starts at that conception, right? And all trimesters have to work together to get that end result that we hope for.
Right. And I think it just comes down to taking care of the cow. I mean, we talk about that and we talk about never having a bad day. Well, what I look at that as is looking at your year-round program and trying to not skimp, trying to not lose condition on those cows. You don't want to be trying to play catch up while they're trying to support the growth of a developing fetus. So, I mean, there are tools we can use, right, to keep an eye on that and watch condition and make sure that we don't fall behind.
Right. It's easier to keep up than it is to catch up, is kind of what I always tell producers. And so if we think about, how nutrition directly impacts the breeding program, Clay, I know we talk about having one calf per cow per year. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really liked your statement there where you said it's easier to keep up than play catch up. If you think about it, we know cattle are naturally going to have a cycle of body condition throughout the year. We're going to have some ebbs and flows no matter how we manage those cattle, just because their requirements are going to change, forage conditions are going to change, and their demands for lactation and other productive functions are going to change. So ultimately, my goal is to try to implement a system where we minimize that dramatic variation in condition throughout the year. Because we know if a cow's doing her job, she's getting bred and having a calf every year, she's certainly going to have requirements throughout that year for either 2 or 3. Either she's going to be open and nursing a calf at her side, she could potentially be bred and nursing a calf at her side, or she could be bred and dry. So at any point during the year, she's either eating for 2 or 3. We really have to consider that. So let's think about that. If we do want her to accomplish our job and get rebred every year and have a calf at her side, we have to get that cow bred within about an 85-day period after calving, because we know a cow's average gestation length is approximately 280 days. So getting her bred in that 85-day period can be a challenge if we don't have her in the appropriate condition prior to the calving season. So if we fall short of our body condition goals before that time, there certainly can be some issues. Not only do we push her back in terms of the next calving season if we do get her bred, but we often run a higher risk of her coming open at preg check, or even if she does get bred, she might be short bred and come up open in subsequent years. So this can become an issue. And if we have this issue prevailing in our cow herd, we can decrease our percentage of calf crop wean per cow exposed and compromise our weaning weight. Just because we've got a younger calf crop, you don't have as many days to gain weight prior to the time of weaning. So really, it's easy to see how a productive breeding season can really be influential not only for this year's calf crop, but for maximizing performance in subsequent years. So there's a few production goals that I like to talk with customers about to really target and design a program to reach these goals. Might not be accomplished this year, but we want to work toward these goals. So my target is to have a 60-day calving season. Now, not only does that allow us to have a uniform heavy calf crop, but it allows us to do several other things. Getting those cows bred early and ready for the next breeding season is certainly very important. And beyond just a 60-day calving season, I like to encourage customers to try to get 75% of those cows to drop a calf within the first 21 days of that 60-day calving window. That certainly benefits having a uniform heavy calf crop that will reach some premiums on sale day. And also, I want to make sure we remind folks that after we wean those cows, we've got some dry cows out there. No matter the type of forage system we're using to maintain those cows, we need to think about those aspects of fetal programming that Christina mentioned earlier and how important that time of year is for those dry cows, because we've got a great opportunity to add condition prior to the next calving season and also really maximize positive fetal programming. So really a neat thing we can do during that time period and something you might not have considered in the past. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Christina to kind of talk about some different nutritional programs to accomplish these goals.
Yeah, thanks, Clay, for that information. Christina, I know that you have quite a few tools that we can offer up to producers as far as metrics, and one of them being body condition score. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how body condition score can be an impact on that?
Yeah, we started off today, we talked about cow nutrition and bull nutrition, and one of the best indicators that we have of how our nutritional program is doing is body condition score. One of the best ways that's been described to me is that it's our fuel gauge and a way for us to see how they're doing. And it's easy to do. It's to be able to go out and just visually assess them in terms of looking across their backbone and their tail head and their ribs and their muscling, and being able to body condition score them allows us to see if we need to make adjustments, if they're able to hold body condition score well on the nutritional plane that we've got them on. And you can see that these are times when we definitely suggest a body condition score, but I would say it's best to do it year round, just because if we wait until we get close and we're already behind, like EB said, it can be hard to catch up. So I do recommend, we try to do it throughout the year, and our goal really is to have bred cows and first calf heifers at a body condition score 6 around calving time. And that just means none of her ribs should be visible. Her backbone should be pretty rounded across the top. Her shoulders and hindquarters should have a nice smooth appearance. Shouldn't be able to see dipping or muscle loss there on those hindquarters or up around the tailhead backbone. She should just have a real smooth appearance. And having her in good condition means she'll return to heat quicker. She'll help prepare. It will really help prepare for the next calving season. A better body condition score, having them there will help support the quality of her colostrum. And that in turn helps your calf to get off to a good start, be able to fight disease challenges, right? So it's really important if we can to be able to monitor body condition score so that she's ready. And then when we talk about bulls, we want bulls to be at a 6, when they're turned in. And we want our cows to hopefully be 5.5, 6 range at that time. At weaning, we'd like to see the dams around a 5.5 if we can to a 6. So body conditioning, scoring the herd, and being able to make adjustments helps to improve a lot of the reproductive factors that we can influence, right, to lead to a successful breeding program. So when we talk about returning to heat, preg rates, calving interval, all of that we can influence by just watching their condition, visually scoring them, and trying to hold them where they're at. So, I think that all of that really helps. The other things that can be done are taking a look at your breeding program. Clay talked about 85 days. Where's yours at? Can you tighten it up just a little bit so that you can wean calves and market them together, make things easier for you? That's one way. Your health protocol. One thing that I think is really good is to reevaluate that with your vet, your animal health supplier. Just ensure that your protocol is tailored to your operation and your region. Everybody's needs are different that way. And I think the biggest thing, as we've talked about fetal programming and maternal nutrition, one of the biggest limiting factors we have is the variation in forage quantity, quality, the changing conditions, the weather patterns. Right now, we've got spots that are dealing with such heavy storms, and we've got other spots that still need moisture, and that really can throw a curveball. And I think using body condition scoring to assess how things are going, knowing that as forage quality dips, we'll see decreased intake and we'll see maybe a gap in our nutritional program during those times, being able to find products to adjust, whether it be hand-fed, self-fed supplementation that we can sneak in at the right time to overcome some of those deficiencies and maintain through those time periods. I think that's the biggest challenge we have. We talk about what we can do from fetal programming. I think that's the biggest factor. And when we look at everything we've talked about today, the other big thing I think of is consistency. I just think if there's a way to maintain consistency year round in what you're doing, we talk about management and health and nutrition. If you can keep things consistent, I feel like what we see in the calf and how that's passed on to generations, that can be well maintained because we've thought about it that way. And hopefully that makes it easier, because when you start nitpicking at this trimester or that one or this time point, it's difficult, right? That's not everyday life, but thinking about never letting him have a bad day and trying to maintain a consistency across the year in terms of what you're providing and how you're managing, I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely. I know in grad school, my advisor always would say consistency is key, right? Consistency is key. And I do think that does go into a lot of the information that we talked about today. Christina, I was wondering if you could just real quickly, briefly talk about how a cattleman or cattlewoman can go out and obtain those body condition scores. Just piece of paper and a pen, and can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, very easy. So I think that it's good if you have a couple people do it. If you have someone around you that can do it too, and you can kind of compare scores, those can be a little subjective, but we have plenty of tools. Just there's a one pager that shows kind of what to look for and where we would score cows, just so that to make it easier when you first start out. But yeah, it's as easy as taking a piece of paper and marking your scores and then seeing how many animals across your herd fall into the different numbers, and that'll give you an idea of trend of where things are at and if things seem to be slipping, and checking those every so often then will help you determine how the herd is doing. And that's the goal, right? Just to give you an indicator.
Right. And, it does allow you to evaluate your nutrition program from a year-round basis, right? Making sure that we're staying consistent, like you mentioned, and having that supplementation out there as forage quality changes, from vegetative to transitional to reproductive, right? We want to make sure that we utilize that biggest resource, which is our forage. And some of that can be done with our intake modifying technology, which, has multiple product forms, and really allows consumption on those to fluctuate as forage quality changes. Okay. So I'm going to kind of go to some questions here that we've gotten. And so thank you everyone that's joined, and Clay and Christina, thank you so much for the information that you provided. One question that we got, Clay, we're going to go way back to the beginning of our Facebook Live here and go back to bull nutrition, and a couple questions that we've gotten focus around best nutrition for growing bull calf. In this instance, it was noted that it was a Brangus calf, but also to what mineral program would you recommend for bulls as well?
Okay, well, we'll address both those questions. So as we talked about, bull nutrition is a critical area if we really want to maximize our reproductive performance of those cattle. So relative to bull mineral nutrition, we've got all different types of products, and depending on your area, your forage basis, your cattle type, the recommendation could vary just a little bit. So I'll just talk about the process I would go through when I'm recommending a mineral program for a customer that's going to provide that mineral to his bulls. The first thing I'd tell you to do is that you have a lot of great resources at your disposal. Your local feed dealer, your local sales specialist or livestock production specialist, or your cattle consultant, somebody such as myself, would be more than happy to come out, look at your cattle, visit with you about your management system, your forages, your feedstuffs, and find the right formulation to meet your needs. Now, when we selected a formulation, there's several other things to consider. I like to recommend products that fall within our Wind and Rain Storm formula line for several reasons. Number one being consistent consumption. If we're providing the right nutrition and the cattle are consuming it consistently at the right rate, we're doing a great job delivering those nutrients to the cattle. Other than that, it'll stand up to weather conditions and certainly be a good quality product throughout the various seasons. A couple things specifically related to the formulation I'd look for. There is some great data out there that would suggest when we feed an organic source of trace minerals to breeding bulls, We can improve semen quality, specifically sperm morphology and motility have been improved when we feed organic zinc relative to inorganic zinc. So a product that might have our Avela4 trace mineral package or potentially the ProPath trace mineral package, such as our ProCycle product, might be a good fit for your breeding bull. Now we're talking about providing that mineral nutrition. We need to consider that the process of spermatogenesis takes about 60 days. So we need to have good nutrition to that bull long before that 60-day period prior to turning that bull out. Because the process of developing that bull, not only his phenotype in terms of structure, body, and his functionality to get out there and cover cows, but his reproductive functionality as well and semen quality, we need to be sure we're at least 120 days out and we're really focusing on our nutrition program for our bulls. So those are just a few things to think about related to mineral. Also noticed a comment there, a question about injectable minerals for bulls. And one thing I tell you is when you're considering injectable minerals, that's a one-time application and you're going to increase their status at one given time. In my mind, an injectable mineral is not a substitute for a complete mineral program throughout the year. So just something to consider relative to that question I saw pop up in the comments. Now, if we go on to address our second question about developing young bulls, that's really an interesting area because there's a lot of different things we can do. We've got different programs for different classes of cattle and production systems using your resources. What I tell you is no matter the program, the first step in developing a bull is to get them off to a good start. So they never get over a good start. If you get those cattle in a good weaning program and get some good efficient gain early on in life, you set them up for health, functional rumen, and growing in a way that they're going to really maximize their end potential. Now, after we get out of the weaning program and transition into more of a growing program, we have several different product lines that would fit that growing type situation. Most of them fall within what we would call our Accuration intake modifying technology line of products. Basically, these are cell-fed products that deliver nutrition to cattle at a targeted intake to be fed along with your forage resources. So perhaps you might be targeting 1 1/4, maybe 1.5% of body weight of the supplement, and the remainder of the diet would be made up of your hay or other forages in the system so that we can develop bulls at a targeted rate of gain to meet our objectives later on before those bulls are ready to turn out. There's other programs we have. We can balance TMRs. We've got some complete products that can be fed as well if you're limited on forages. So basically, if you get with your local salesperson, LPS, or consultant, they can get you on the right program to develop those bulls. At the end of the day, we think we can develop a program that will safely develop bulls to be that ultimate athlete that goes out and gets the job done during the breeding season.
All right. Thank you, Clay. One thing I want to bring up, I know you touched on the trace mineral aspect, right? But cattle require 14 minerals, right? Macro and micro minerals, and having that complete mineral program that hits all of those minerals is really, really important from not only a bull development standpoint, but also obviously the information that we talked about from a cow nutrition standpoint too. So I didn't want to not cover minerals in a lot of detail, but just real quickly wanted you guys to be thinking about, the whole mineral program as a complete package. Christina, I'm going to go to you for a quick question here. And one of the things that sometimes we hear out in the field, if cattle go through a drought or limited forage resources or something like that, what we know about fetal programming now kind of helps us explain why maybe heifers aren't staying in the herd for a long period of time, right? If we think about, back in 2012 when we had a pretty rough drought across the country, those heifer calves that were in utero, maybe they didn't get necessarily the nutrients that they needed to help with their fertility long term. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so a couple things. We're going to reach way back, but Clay talked about the concept of fetal programming, and there was a point in there when he discussed genetic expression and the ability for that expression to change in that calf that's born based on what mom went through in utero. The genes are just being expressed differently. I think you used a recipe and how the ingredients are put together, Clay, but it's that idea and what the research has shown us and how I understand this is that depending on what mom goes through, it is going to change the genetic expression of her offspring. And depending on what that event is, whether it was poor nutritional playing during a certain time period, EB referenced drought, maybe it was sickness, that can have adverse consequences. And one of those is fertility. We've seen research that's looked at generations where mom in first generation has went through some sort of event, in this case undernutrition, and then they looked at her heifer and their fertility, and when they went to reproduce, what did that look like? And what was interesting about that research is it showed us that moms that didn't necessarily go through something challenging, their offspring had better pregnancy rates and less birthing difficulty, and just had overall better reproductive performance than offspring from moms that had gone through some sort of challenge. There's been research that's looked at it in different ways, and we're still trying to understand all of that and why. But yes, I mean, when we talk about the generation of the herd and the impacts of fetal programming, it goes much further beyond us talking about what happened in one calf cycle today. It goes on in your herd as you retain those animals, and it's up to, I think, all of us to, with some of the tools we talked about, EB, watch how they perform and decide what we need to do in the future. But yeah, I mean, reproductive performance can be influenced by fetal programming.
Absolutely. I think this stuff is really fascinating. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to wanting to talk about fetal programming, and I just think it's so interesting of how it can, how it starts at in utero and it can impact your cattle operation for 8, 12 years if we really think about it. So I really appreciate Clay and Christina, you guys spending some time with us this afternoon. A lot of great information that you guys have provided for us. And so thank you. Just real quick, guys, for if you are looking for more information on some of the topics that we talked about today, you can go to purinamills.com /cattle feed. There's a lot of great articles and resources, and you can get in contact with one of us from that website, and we can get your answers to you based on your questions. And so with that, I am going to end this Facebook Live, and hope you guys have a great day and a great weekend coming up. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.